Hi, I'm Annabelle Sims, and this is my Girl Scout Gold Award project, creating informed and active voters. This video is on the Constitution. The Constitution is the document that set up the system of government we have in the United States today. The Constitution was ratified and went into effect in 1789. The Constitution is made up of three main parts: the preamble, the 7 articles, and 27 amendments, including the Bill of Rights. The preamble is the first part of the Constitution. It describes the purpose of the Constitution and the purpose of the federal government. It lists that purpose as to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. This provided the ideal of freedom that America was built on. The 7 articles are the second part of the Constitution. They establish the structure of the government and the process for which the Constitution can be changed. Article 1 sets up the legislative branch. It sets up the 2 chambers of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. It also establishes the powers of the legislative branch and gives its ability to check and balance the other 2 branches. Article 2 sets up the executive branch. It allows the branch to manage the operations of the government through federal departments and is headed by the president. This article grants the executive branch its powers. Article 3 sets up the judicial branch. It talks about the Supreme Court and how judges are appointed for life. It allows Congress to determine the size of the Supreme Court. Article 4 describes the relationship between the states and the federal government. It guarantees that each state has a Republican government. It also shows the relationship between the states and how new states can join the Union. Additionally, it says that all states are equal to one another. Article 5 allows for the amendment process. It describes how the Constitution can be added to or changed. Article 6 establishes the Constitution as the highest law of the land. Article 7 lists the requirements for ratification. It dictates the number of states needed to ratify the Constitution in order for it to go into effect. The amendments are the final portion of the Constitution. The Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. These amendments describe certain rights of United States citizens that the Founding Fathers did not want to include in the main body of the Constitution, but still felt were important enough to include in the document. The First Amendment is the right to freedom of religion, speech, the press, the right to peaceful assembly, and the right to petition the government. The freedom of religion allows people to practice whatever religion they choose and provides legal protection for people that practice their religion. Freedom of speech allows people to say most things without fear of persecution or imprisonment, and similarly, the freedom of press allows people to publish things without those fears. These freedoms all have reasonable limits. For example, even though everyone has the right to freedom of speech, a person cannot yell fire in a crowded theater when there is not one, as this will cause a panic and put people in danger. The right to peaceful assembly and the right to petition the government allows people to protest the government and exercise their freedom of speech. The Second Amendment is the right to keep and bear arms. This allows citizens to be able to defend themselves and their property, as well as form a militia if necessary. Everyone has the right to bear arms, but there are specific gun regulation laws in each state. The Third Amendment is that soldiers cannot be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner. This allows people to have a private and secure home and prevents people from being forced to house soldiers in their homes. The Fourth Amendment is the right of people to be secure against unreasonable searches and seizures. This requires law enforcement to get warrants or to have a pressing reason to do any searches, and therefore protects people and their property. The Fifth Amendment guarantees the right to a grand jury in criminal cases, forbids double jeopardy, protects against self-incrimination, and requires due process of the law. The right to a grand jury helps to determine whether or not charges should be brought up against an individual in criminal cases. Double jeopardy would be when a person is tried for a similar or the same crime that they were already acquitted for or convicted of. This amendment prevents that from happening. In order to prevent self-incrimination, a person cannot be compelled to be a witness against themselves. When people say, "I plead the Fifth," they are referring to this part of the amendment and are not answering questions in order to not self-incriminate. Due process is fair treatment through the justice system of every person. The Sixth Amendment is the right to a speedy and public trial in criminal prosecutions by an impartial jury. This allows a fair trial in a timely manner and helps to ensure that the justice system runs smoothly. The Seventh Amendment is the right to a trial by jury. A jury is a group of one's peers that determines the verdict of a trial. This right helps to protect the integrity of the justice system and to ensure that everyone has a fair trial. The Eighth Amendment is that excessive bail nor fines are required and cruel and unusual punishments are not inflicted in the justice system. Excessive bail and fines are not required in order to provide equal opportunity for people of all socioeconomic backgrounds. The lack of cruel and unusual punishments ensure the humane treatment of convicts. The Ninth Amendment is that the enumeration of rights in the Constitution cannot be used to deny other rights of the people. This means that the rights listed in the Constitution cannot be used to deny the rights that were left out to the people of the United States. The Founding Fathers were concerned that some people might seize on the fact that some rights were not listed in the Constitution and use that as a reason to deny those rights, so they added this amendment to prevent that. The 10th Amendment says that the powers not delegated to the United States in the Constitution are reserved for the states of the people. So any powers not specifically assigned to the federal government are given to the states. Since the Constitution was ratified, Article 5 has been used many times to add amendments to the Constitution. In 1795, the 11th Amendment was added. It says that states are protected from suits by people in other states or foreign countries. In 1804, the 12th Amendment was added. It says that electors will vote for president and vice president separately. It also says that whoever holds the majority of votes for president wins. If no one holds the majority, the House of Representatives votes, and whoever holds the majority wins. Additionally, the vice president with the most votes wins. In 1865, the 13th Amendment was added. It says that slavery and involuntary servitude is illegal except as a punishment for a crime, and Congress can enforce this with legislation. This was added just after the Civil War had occurred. In 1868, the 14th Amendment was added. It says that all people born in the U.S. are citizens and states cannot reduce the rights of citizens. This amendment also effectively undid the 3/5 compromise in Article 1, stating that representatives of several states will be based on their whole population. Additionally, former Confederates cannot hold office, and the U.S. assumed the debts for the Union War, but not the Confederate, as well as the fact that Congress can enforce this with legislation. In 1870, the 15th Amendment was added. It says that the right to vote cannot be denied based on race, color, or previous servitude, and Congress can enforce this with legislation. In 1913, the 16th Amendment was added. It says that Congress can collect an income tax. Also in 1913, the 17th Amendment was added. It allows for the direct election of senators. In 1919, the 18th Amendment was added. It says that the manufacture, sale, transportation, importation, and exportation of alcohol is prohibited, and Congress can enforce this with legislation. This was ratified due to the popularity of the temperance movement. In 1920, the 19th Amendment was added. It says that the right to vote cannot be denied to a citizen on account of sex. This granted women the right to vote after the flourishing of the women's suffrage movement. In 1933, the 20th Amendment was added. It changed inauguration day to January 20th for presidents and January 3rd for senators and representatives. It also says that Congress must assemble at least once a year, as well as if the president-elect dies, then a vice president acts as president until there is a replacement. In the case of death, the House of Representatives chooses a president and the Senate chooses a vice president. Also in 1933, the 21st Amendment was added. It repealed the 18th Amendment. It says that states can import and export liquors as long as they do not violate other laws. Prohibition was not a success and really only served to increase illegal liquor trade, so after the Great Depression, the 18th Amendment was repealed. In 1951, the 22nd Amendment was added. It says that presidents cannot hold more than 2 terms. This was after World War II, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt served 4 consecutive terms before dying. In 1961, the 23rd Amendment was added. It says that citizens of the District of Columbia can elect senators in national elections. Additionally, they get the same number of senators and representatives as they would if they were a state, but not more than the least populous state. And Congress can enforce this with legislation. D.C. is not a state, but it is still the capital of the United States, and people live there. However, prior to this amendment, the people that lived there did not get adequate representation in presidential elections. In 1964, the 24th Amendment was added. It says that citizens have the right to vote in any primary or election, and Congress can enforce this with the appropriate legislation. Prior to this, in some parts of the country, particularly the Jim Crow South, poll taxes were required, and this often prevented people from voting in elections or primaries. This was ratified due to the prevalence of the civil rights movement. In 1967, the 25th Amendment was added. It says that if the president dies, resigns, or is removed from office, the vice president becomes president. The new president then nominates the vice president that is confirmed by the majority in both houses. If the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office, the vice president will be acting president after a written statement is produced. Additionally, the vice president becomes acting president if they and Congress produce a written statement that the president is unable to discharge their powers. In 1971, the 26th Amendment was added. It says that the voting age is 18 years old and Congress can enforce this with legislation. In 1992, the 27th Amendment was added. It says that laws changing the compensation of senators and representatives do not go into effect until after an election has happened. This gives voters a chance to take members of Congress out of office before any raise they give themselves would go into effect. Those are all of the amendments that have currently been added to the Constitution. The amendments, as well as the Constitution, are what the branches of government fight to preserve, protect, or use in one way or another. This document has provided the basis for our modern-day democracy and helped preserve the freedom of United States citizens.